Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are. Welcome to the fourth in our series of 4 virtual conversations on compassionate systems change in education. This series has taken a step toward building a research community of leaders in educational innovation, leaders at MIT with partners outside of MIT, leaders interested in systems, how to make them more humane, more compassionate, more generative. The underlying premise behind all of this is that education can be a leading edge shaping the cultural changes we need throughout society, and that education innovators around the world recognize the need to work at multiple levels with multiple constituencies within dynamic and complex social systems. In this series, we've touched on some of the most pressing issues of our time: race and equity, health and well-being of families and communities, challenges to education, to the environment, lessons from the pandemic. Beneath it all is this fundamental question: how can we create deep and sustained change in the systems that shape our lives? Can we develop tools to identify and document critical indicators of success in systems change over the long haul, frameworks and narratives and empirical studies that will ground the work and move it forward? We've been asking ourselves, what kind of research can help tell a story that seems abstract? Systems is such an abstract concept, but could not be more urgent or more vivid in millions of daily lives. We want to thank our MIT co-organizers, Open Learning, J-WEL, the Abdul, Latif, Jameel World Education Lab, and the Comparative Media Studies and Writing Department in SHAS, the School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences. We also want to thank very much the funders, the Carnegie Corporation of New York and the Stewart Foundation, for generous support of this series and of the emerging systems awareness research community at MIT, this community we're convening today and going forward. We've had 3 prior conversations, as I've said. In the first, in January, we heard from Peter Senge, Mette, Boell, and Eric Klopfer about how their work has brought them to this point and what they hope may emerge from this new collaborative community they intend to create. The second was a probe into issues of equity, broadly speaking, equity which Michael McAfee approaches through public policies designed to lift up 100 million people, the majority people of color who live at or near poverty, equity which Larissa Duncan advances in research to bring mindfulness and compassion into parenting and pregnancy, healthy families and schools and medical settings. In the third, we focused on population level data to support well-being and system-wide change. We looked at the interdependent cultivation of individual and community well-being, breaking out of the individualistic bias of the mainstream educational enterprise. We saw the promise of rich data sets that can map progress and heard about 2 mature progressive efforts in British Columbia and the state of California to address the simple but neglected questions that all communities should be asking but rarely do. The question is, how are our children doing? And what can we be doing to create environments in which they can thrive? The British Columbia effort was initiated in the late 90s with leadership of Kimberly Schoen-Reichel, who joined us. From California's statewide expanded learning program, we had 4 leaders who spanned levels and roles: Michael Funk, Tiffany Gibson, Ernesto Duran, and Jenny Snyder. They gave us an intriguing glimpse into 2 very large laboratories where colleagues are advancing the kinds of questions that we hope this new collaborative community will continue to address. My role has been to moderate, although Peter and Mette and I will share that role today so that I can also engage in conversation with today's guests. We're looking forward to that, all of us. I am, as I've said each time, an advisor to Mette and Peter's Center for Systems Awareness and a fan. I've been watching it for a long time and very much a believer in the work that they're doing. My involvement at MIT goes back 2 decades now as a life member emerita of the Board of Trustees. At MIT, systems awareness and systems change are second nature, a fundamental underpinning of the Institute's aims in the world of education and the future of learning. And also beyond that, in many of the Institute's visions for a better world, as we speak, MIT is launching a series of grand challenge projects to address climate change. And in that work, systems thinking is very deeply embedded. Peter's work, of course, is woven through that MIT story, and Mette brings a welcome, fresh perspective to it. So now, today's program. All along, we've been looking into the future, and today we'll see it through the eyes of the people who will actually live and shape it, the youth activists. We take this perspective in the conviction that their voices are vitally important, their commitments and their worries, their ideals and ideas and questions. As we were planning this session, Peter referred to this conviction as our irrational passion that young people will be the leaders, not later, but sooner. Today's conversation is in part about climate change, but it's placed in the broader context of compassionate systems. So from the Center for Systems Awareness, the CSA, as we refer to it, and they do, we have two staff leaders of its youth leadership program. They'll start us off. That program focuses on developing systems awareness, systems sensing capabilities, and building personal mastery and youth agency in general. Then, in addition, we'll hear about the compassionate climate learning community that they're incubating. So first I want to call on our two members, two of four who are with us, but the two who will speak of the Compassionate Systems Awareness Youth Leadership staff. Both have the title, I love this title, Youth Leadership and Well-Being Champion. Both are certified compassionate systems master practitioners. They've been through the year-long program and have earned their certification. Gustav Böll and Jonas Jabril. After they set the stage for the discussion, they'll introduce several of the student ambassadors from the British School of Jakarta, which is their flagship school in the compassionate systems work, and then other colleagues who are in Indonesia, in India and Thailand as well. So first of all, Gus and Jonas, would you each please introduce yourselves and tell us a bit about how your work relates to fostering systems awareness in education and beyond? Take it away.
Thank you, Diana. And thanks for this great introduction. So my name is Gustav Böll, and this is Jonas Jabril. And first, I will be talking a little bit about our work in general, and thereafter Jonas will show us actually this En-ROAD simulator that I'm sure you all, or maybe some of you are familiar with and some of you are not, and also talk a little bit more specifically about how we deal with climate change. So yeah, I have been working at the Center for Systems Awareness now since it started. So that's about a little 7-8 years. And we have been working from the beginning to really try to see how can we take all of these compassionate systems approaches and use them with students and young people from around the world. So today, as Diana mentioned, we will focus more in on climate change because that is not only something that is really dear to our hearts and something that I personally believe to be the most significant struggle of our time, but also because it really is a perfect example of showcasing or trying to explain how we can use the compassionate systems framework to deal with complex social issues. So the broad lines of the work that we do is really can be separated into two different parts. One part is working directly with schools, such as what we do with the British School of Jakarta and many other schools from around the world. And here we train students and we train teachers in how to use this in all of their topics and also in all of their extracurricular activity. This is especially useful to sort of bring in around service streams, for example, because of course compassion is a perfect place for that. And then what we're really focusing on now is really this transition towards broader community. And one of our main key sort of parts of that is really trying to build this whole community of compassionate systems climate activists. So we have several projects that are between schools, and then we have our youth council, which is our youth partners who are working with us on all the work that we do, so that we make sure that we always integrate the voice of the youth into every decision that we make. because as Peter has said many times, and which I really love, is we need to sort of get away from the whole paradigm that education is something being done by adults and done to children or young people. And so we want to really integrate them in all levels and in all aspects of the work that we're doing. So for example, when we're starting this whole lab and we're going to study the effects of this type of work, it's really vital to us and super important to include youth also in the design of how these research programs will be conducted. Another community project that we have is called the Compassionate Climate Program, and that is what we will focus more on today. So all of our work can be said to have three focuses: the inner focus, the outer focus, and the other focus. And when we talk about climate change, or let me just explain these three focuses first. So the inner focus is really having to do with our emotions, our bodily systems, our somatic awareness, our ability to regulate emotions, and also to describe our emotions precisely, and to, all the mindfulness exercise, training our awareness, all of these kinds of things is the inner dimension. Then there's the outer dimension, which is the immediate systems that we interact with. So in the student's case, it's their classroom, it's their school, it's their family, and all of the places where they really have the chance to do something and have an impact or show up differently. And then there's the outer perspective, or the outer focus, which is these large world issues, where, of course, climate change is a perfect example of something that is interconnected to almost every problem or thing that we see in the world. So it's very obvious that when we work with climate change and we introduce these students to the systems perspective on a topic such as climate change, or the climate crisis, as I usually call it, when they really start to understand this, this is not just a mental understanding, it's a deeply emotional understanding as well. Because when you really look at this simulator, for example, or look at some of the other things that shows us the severity of this problem, it's heartbreaking. And it's definitely not something that we can fix easily. So we really try to make sure that we also not just teach them how to understand this, but also teach them how to deal with all of the emotions that come with that, and try to create a generative social field, or in other words, a safe space, or a place where it's okay to talk about the emotions that come up when we deal with such a problem as climate change. That's one of our key focuses in this program. So the program is really built up over half a year. It's 90 minutes every second week, and we've done 2 times this program now, and we're doing 2 more within this year. And there is some really nice aspects to this, and one of them is that we do this with teams from different schools from around the world. So it's international, which is very, of course, fitting when it comes to climate change. And then it's also intergenerational. So we try to include teachers and students and administrators or principals in the same learning group, because we recognize that when it comes to climate change, we're all students and we all carry the responsibility. So we use the En-ROAD simulator, which we will show you in a minute, or Jonas will show you. And then we introduce the systems of understanding, as well as these more inner relational aspects, also how to talk about climate change with peers, or how to deal with the people that don't necessarily agree with you. And of course, those of you who know the compassionate systems framework will know that this is a big part of our work as well, to really understand that there's more perspectives in lives, and to try to generate a more compassionate stance. So I think with that being said, I will pass it to Jonas, who will walk us through just a very brief example with the simulator. Thank you.
Thank you, Gus. So yeah, my name is Jonas, and I'm also part of the youth leadership team. Leadership team, and yeah, most of you, or some of you may know the simulator already, but I would love to show you an example here. So if I share my screen, I assume you all can see it now. And so for those of you who don't know, this is the En-ROADS Climate Simulator developed by MIT Sloan and Climate Interactive. And it's a dynamic model that allows us to test assumptions and to engage students with, in real time, find out what policies will have what effect on climate change and on other systems dynamics that are involved. So for those of you who don't know it, I'll just quickly describe the simulator because there's a lot going on. The two most important graphs you find here at the top. The one on the left describes the global sources of energy and where they're coming from. So color-coded into, coal and oil and gas, renewables, and so on. And on the right-hand side, we have the predicted global temperature change, the predicted rise in that by 2100. So what we like to do with our students is to ask for them to predict what will happen if we move certain sliders. So we'll try that shortly with you, and we'll use a good example here because there's a lot of nice things to talk about with it. So my question to you, just to think about for a few seconds, is what do you think will happen if we, for example, decide to tax oil very heavily? And so just think about that for a moment. What do you think, what kind of dynamics do you think are involved? And what do you think might change in the graph here on the left? Will the total usage of energy diminish, or what other things will take over? Just make a prediction. And then let's test it. So this is an interesting example because, as you might notice, the difference in the rise in global temperature, as you see up here, is only 0.1 degrees Celsius. And so this is one example of a climate policy that informs us that there might be something off with our assumptions, because a lot of people think that that would be a really good idea to tax oil very heavily. And so this is like a gateway that we use to talk about complex systems dynamics, and specifically this example has a name. It's called squeezing the balloon. So when we restrict the supply of oil in this case, then coal and natural gas tend to compensate. We can see that by just replaying what we just did in the simulator. And you might see that the blue area here and the brown area, which are coal and natural gas, tend to fill the void that oil used to occupy. So this is just an example of how we might use the simulator to spark conversation. And then we'll test other things to obviously build more aspirational scenarios for the future, because there are more high leverage options that we do like to explore. So yeah, and as we all know, climate change is not an isolated problem. So we do like to also include other potential systems dynamics and talk about multi-solving. So we think about things like, how can certain policies have positive effects on other things than climate change, such as pollution or jobs creation. So these are some of the things that we can explore with the simulator and through the framework. And we also like to explore questions of equity. So something that the simulator doesn't show so graphically, but is something we talk about, is this is a simulator that is based on really good science, and it matches a lot of the predictions of other big simulators, and it's actually showing to a fairly high degree of certainty what would happen if you made these policies. This is not just a fictional scenario. This is probably a good approximation of what would happen. So this would affect a lot of people's lives. This is not just some theoretical approach. So when we think about that, when we think that, what would happen if 50% of coal miners lost their jobs from one day to another, what does that mean? And how do we deal with that problem so that it becomes a feasible political alternative as well? So yeah, there's been a short introduction to the simulator. And I'd also just like to say that when looking at this scenario, for example, looking at oil, we obviously are both confronted with, the gravity of the situation, how much needs to be done. And this is why it's so important, as Gus was mentioning, to that we work on the inner aspects of our emotionality and our compassion towards others, so that we still have the resources to, despite the gravity of the current situation, strive towards a better vision of the future. And that is actually also something that the simulator helps with, because there are solutions out there and we just need to discover them.
Right. Thank you, Jonas. And I'll just add one sentence before we pass it on to Diana. I think you can put away the simulator now, if that's possible.
Yes.
Thank you. So thank you so much, Jonas, for sharing that. I think that's really helpful. And just to sort of build on your point, what's really, really, really vital to us and important to us is that when we talk to young people about any issue, be it equity, some sort of social change or climate change, how do we make sure that they understand the current reality, the systems aspects of it, and how do they understand how to build a vision? And then, that whole space in between, where we are now and where we want to be, to hold the emotional tension in that and to use that as a driving force. And we believe that can only be done if we not only have a progression in their understanding of something systematically and mathematically, for example, but also have a progression in their inner skills. So we start out very simply in this compassionate climate program by focusing on awareness, counting the breathing and so on. And then we move on to dealing with emotionality. And in the end, and the ending sessions, we'll be focusing on cultivating compassion, kindness, and empathy, which is, of course, as equally important an ingredients when we are talking about the climate crisis. Thank you.
Great. So let me ask you a couple of questions, and then we have your colleagues, and we'll bring them in too. So that's a beautiful description of the sort of overarching structure and goal that you have. So what's it like for you when you've implemented it? Give us some examples of times when you've taught these systems, both the toolkit from compassionate systems and the En-ROADS, and how do your students respond? What happens when they, first of all, as they're learning the practices of the compassionate systems, the meditation and the different ways of opening meetings and the different ways of opening their hearts and their minds? What's that like? Do they take to it easily, well? Are some of them skeptical about it? How do you get over the bumps? And then, so starting with that, and then to Jonas with the En-ROADS, specifically with the En-ROADS.
So I think, in general, you can say that the many hundreds of students that I have taught now over these years,
right,
they are generally so much quicker than all of the rest of us to really get all of the framework and really, see the relevancy and understand, but especially the systems part at first. So something like the systems iceberg, understanding the artifacts and mental models, creating the structures and the behaviors of a system, and also something like shifting the burden, where you understand how a problem is caused by another problem. The systems piece, they get really, really quickly and they apply it super fast. The emotional part takes longer time because it's not something that we're very used to in our world. So doing a check-in, the first many times we do a check-in with a new group of students, often it will sound something like, well, I'm fine,
Right. Yeah.
And then only after a while, they start to really have the somatic awareness, meaning the awareness of what's going on in their body, and also their emotional, intelligence to say, well, I can feel some tension and it might have something to do with what happened to me yesterday. And it feels like this and that. And then we all get so much closer to each other. And then when that starts to happen, is when we see the field deepening and the groups becoming more closely knit to each other and being able to tackle something like climate change from a much deeper standpoint.
You used the term in your presentation, Gus, of a social field that's generative. And it sounds like that's what you're discussing. One of the questions is, how do you recognize that? How do we know when a social field shifts into something that's generative, that has inherent trust built into it, so that people are willing to take a risk, expose parts of themselves that they've kept under wraps for their whole lives? How do you do that, and how do you see it?
That's a very difficult question. I think that's probably one of the reasons why we want to start the lab and try to do some research, is to figure out what exactly does that mean to have a generative social field. And we don't have a finite answer, but definitely, it has something to do with trust.
Yes.
And it has something to do with, acknowledging that, it can't happen, for example, in a situation where you're being tested. It can't happen in a situation where there's a wrong and a right answer. So we know some things that needs to be there. And then I think my best answer would be that we all know when it happens, but we just don't know exactly why and when.
Right.
Yeah.
And it also has something to do with practices that are systematic, that are to which people make commitments, right? Is that
well, of course. I mean, if you have more stability in yourself, let's say you have some kind of practice that increases your resiliency and also increases your level of emotional regulation, then the chances that you are in a relaxed enough state to partake in a generative social field at any given time will be higher. And also these ritualized practices that we use, such as the check-in, is a way to get us all on the same page. Everybody's heard, everybody's been doing a grounding together. And that also definitely increases the chances of any situation being generative.
Good. Thank you. So now, Jonas and Gus, will you please introduce your colleagues? And
I will.
Yeah, thank you.
So we have Jonas Jabril. I think that was how I should say it. We're both from Denmark, so I usually say it in Danish. Jonas has been working with us for only about half a year, a little more, and he's just been through the Compassionate Climate program, which is why we wanted to include him also today. And Jonas is studying psychology and has been super interested in the systems dynamics and also the psychology of people for many years. And Jonas and I have met in a spiritual community where we both practice our meditation together.
Good. And then the ambassadors.
I thought it was Jonas you meant. I'm sorry.
The ambassadors who will be joining us now.
Yeah.
We're ready to bring them in.
So ready.
Their stories. Yep.
Right. So today we brought with us some of our favorite ambassadors, and that they are all a part of our youth council. And we have Caitlin and Sarah and Kenneth from the British School of Jakarta. And we have Journey and Nat and OK from DSIL in Thailand, Bangkok. And then we have Shonak from India.
Good, great. All right, so we'd like to hear from each of you. The first question, just kind of a general question: how has your learning of compassionate systems, of these principles that Gus has laid out in a general way, the inner, the outer, and the other, how has learning all of that better equipped you to deal with the challenges that you face in your lives and as you think about the future? Who wants to jump in first, and then you can, and I'd love to hear sort of specific examples if you have them, things, moments for you that were breakthrough moments or challenging moments, heartbreaking moments, whatever it might be, just how these learnings have affected you. Who wants to begin?
Yeah, so I'll start us off. I think obviously when we think of climate change in the bigger picture, it's very, very overwhelming and a very, very scary thing to think about. The fact that we are practically destroying the earth to the point where it might get so difficult for us to live that we might all be eradicated. And all of these compassionate systems, tools, and learnings that we've learned just help us to tackle that problem in a compassionate way, in a way that's easy for us to understand, as well as like work through and process. And I feel like all of those things just make it very, very easy for us to understand the actual concept as well.
So how so, Shanak? How does it make it easier? What does it do for you? It gets you tuned into yourself more deeply. Can you think of an example, a time when something really came together for you as you were learning this?
Yeah, sure. So as we were going through the En-ROADS training, I felt that it was quite difficult for us to sometimes grasp the concepts that we were talking about. And as we became like more secure in our generative social field, as we became more secure within our group, it became easier for us to think about how it affects us, and how those fears and concepts are, although irrational in nature, can become rational by talking to people. And I feel like that just became easier for me. Personally, when I was looking at all these concepts, just talking to people and being compassionate just helped me understand them a little bit better. If any of my other peers would like to add on to that.
Does anybody want to jump in?
Sure, I can jump in real quick. So the compassionate systems tools really helps us dive into and really look into like the root causes of certain problems. So if you apply this to like global warming or climate change or one of the profound environmental problems we see today, it really helps you get down to like the root causes and put it into perspective. So it's not just this broad problem, but you can see like the different aspects of it, the different aspects that affect our lives. So I think it really brings it down to the scale where you can kind of relate with it instead of just seeing this as a broad kind of far away problem. So I think that in a sense that helps us feel the sense of needing to take action and work towards these causes that we see.
Anybody else want to jump in? Some way in which
yeah.
Sarah, thank you.
I just wanted to add on to Caitlin. One of the is in collaboration with BSJ students and Danish students. We don't have any Danish students here, but they're also amazing ambassadors. And we are working on tackling plastic pollution. And in a group that I'm with, Caitlin, we used one of the compassion system tools to tackle plastic pollution and how it relates to climate change. And so through these tools, we can actually connect a lot of different aspects and topics and see how they relate to each other and how they build on to each other, and how it kind of creates loops, which are also another type of tool in the compassion system. There's a very broad range of tools that we can use to break down daily problems or big problems such as climate change, and we use it a lot in our school as well. We use it almost every single day, and we also teach younger students about it, and we talk about climate change a lot at our school to help break it down and find ways to tackle this problem. So yeah.
Right. So it's partly about stepping into huge complexity and breaking it down in ways that enable you to take pieces of it and imagine ways to go forward towards solutions. Is that what you're saying essentially? What about the there was a big study that was done recently in the Lancet, 10,000 young people, and the feelings of anger and rage and betrayal by governments around the world, betrayal by boomers, like some of us here on this call. How do you deal with that? Where does that go? How does the compassionate systems approach help you mobilize emotions that are constructive and helpful, that can move you forward without getting derailed by denial, distraction, defeat, all of the depression, even all of the negative emotions that can be so overwhelming? Anybody want to take it? Caitlin, did you want to?
Yeah, sure, I can start us off. So some of the compassionate systems tools help us explore our own thoughts, our own feelings, and help us understand better of why we think this way. For example, the ladder of inference, it helps you understand different perspectives. So I guess we've been really familiar with tools such as the ladder of inference, the iceberg. So sort of over time, they've been ingrained in our brain and kind of how we think. So as a result, when we're looking at these types of issues, these types of challenges, we look as to, the reasons behind why we see what we see and why people think what we think, what they think. So we don't necessarily hold any large grudges against the people in the past or anything that's happened. I think we usually channel this passion into taking action as the youth of today, and hopefully contributing to something positive in relation to these profound challenges. Yeah.
I like that. We channel passion into taking action as the youth of today. Looking to your future. Thank you. Thank you for that. Anybody else been through this? Or the En-ROADS? Anybody want to comment on En-ROADS? I think all of you have been exposed to the En-ROADS simulator. What was that experience like? People, anybody who hasn't had a chance to speak? No?
If I may,
Sure.
I think certainly, I'll add on to Caitlin and then I'll answer the En-ROADS question. Is that okay?
Sure, anything, whatever seems real.
I think certainly being exposed to the tools over a long period of time and being constantly like being reinforced with them has kind of like allowed us to have a certain way of thinking and processing information, which makes it much easier to deal with issues like this. And I think certainly the fact that it's been ingrained in our minds, like Caitlin said, allows us to think of it in a rational manner rather than thinking about it irrationally and just blurting things out of emotion. And I feel like personally that has helped me a lot in my both personal as well as like academic life. And I find that very, very beneficial. And adding on to the En-ROADS thing, I found the experience very, very enriching. As a student, I think the concept of environmentalism and going green came as quite cliche in today's world,
Yes.
but the En-ROADS kind of like introduce a new way of looking at environmentalism, a more rational way, a more scientific way, something which I enjoyed quite a bit. And I feel the fact that this was all backed up by the compassionate learning systems, the fact that we still had an emotional aspect, a connective aspect to the process was very, very good for me because it allowed me to also express my emotions as well as understand how we could tackle this problem. So in Caitlin's words, it allowed us to take our passion and make something out of it. And
Great.
I found that very, very enriching.
Great. Great. Thank you. Peter or Mette, any questions you'd like to ask?
I'd love to
Yeah.
hear some responses too,
Yeah,
because
good.
there's something emerging here, which to me seems quite remarkable. On the one hand, you've all talked about how you're able to kind of be more present with your emotions.
Right.
And let your emotions be there. But then on the other hand, you've also talked about then you can think more rationally.
Yeah.
So often people think it's one or the other. Either I'm emotional and I'm passionate, I get connected, or I have to be cold and analytic and rational. You seem to put the two of those together. I'd be really curious, any reflections you have about that?
Anybody? The world sort of thinks of those as two different things, right? You go one way or you go the other way. Somehow this is a way to integrate the two.
If I
Can
may,
it-
so
Do you have any?
yeah,
Kenneth?
sorry. So, us as human beings, we are not rational beings with emotion, but rather we are emotional beings with rationale. It's the other way around. And yeah, and they are different aspects of the way we think, because one is controlled by the heart and one is controlled by the head. But regardless of that, they're both kind of inherently interconnected, in the sense that if you think rationally, that doesn't mean you cannot think emotionally as well. And for me personally, the tools have kind of balanced that scale for me, because naturally I think of myself as a more rational person rather than a more emotional person. I can be a bit stone cold at times, let's just say. So yeah, having experience with the tools, having experience with the framework, it allows me to think more of my emotions, to say, learn to consider others' viewpoints as well, and learn to take those into consideration, and kind of think within myself how other people's emotions might affect the things that I'm doing, and how my actions may affect other people's emotions. So kind of having that understanding of both myself, so that's inner understanding, and also understanding of the system around me, that really helps me with gaining a more well-rounded and a more holistic understanding and approach to the things that I do in my daily life. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very helpful. Very helpful. Anybody else want to comment on this integration? The world of emotions and the world of rational actions. Anything more to say about that? Any resistance you find to that as you're working with other people and spreading the word around your schools and other schools and out into the larger world? No?
If I may briefly connect back to the En-ROADS, Gus mentioned very, very briefly that we learned how to tackle and deal with and interact with people who may not believe in the same environmental beliefs that we believe in.
Right.
And I personally believe that the connection of both the head and the heart within ourselves, being confident in ourselves, has allowed us to interact with people like that in a rational manner rather than acting irrationally and becoming emotional. So I believe that the connection between these two parts of our body has benefited us greatly in interacting with people that may not share the same mental models or values or ideals as we do. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. So Earth Day is coming up. Do you have plans for Earth Day? No? Hasn't penetrated your world so much. Mette, any questions? Any last questions before we break into our breakout groups? These young people you've worked with so closely, you know them better than I.
Well, I actually had the experience with a few of you where I was teaching your teachers and you were being taught by Gus and you were all learning the same stuff. And then, you know, we would teach the same material, only Gus had half the time that I had with the adults. And so you all would come in during the lunch break and share with the teachers what you had learned. And I've never seen teachers as flabbergasted and, you know, so many jaws dropped, because you all just picked it up so quickly. And for the adults, it's much more of a struggle. I think, just in general terms, we, the older people, need to unlearn a whole lot of stuff before we can learn this. And it feels as if, or it seems as if it's much more kind of readily available and intuitive to many of you. And all I want to say is I'm just really grateful. I know you're up really late at night being in Southeast Asia. So grateful for you all being here. And I would like for you to share your age, because my assumption is that people on this call will think that you're far older than you in fact are. So I would just, if we could just go around the circle and you could all share your age grade and which class you're in. I just
and your country and your country. Yes, that's a great idea. So Caitlin.
Hi everyone, my name is Caitlin. I'm currently 15 years old. I'm in grade 10 and I'm in Indonesia.
Wonderful. Thank you for being with us. Journey.
Hi, my name is Journey. I'm 15 years old. I just finished grade 9, so next year I'm grade 10. I live in Bangkok, Thailand.
Bang. Wow, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Kenneth?
Yeah, I'm Kenneth. So I'm from Malaysia, but I live in Jakarta with Caitlin and Zara. And currently I'm in grade 10. I'm 15, turning 16. Yeah.
Thank you. Fantastic. Natawat.
I'm not, and I'm from Thailand, and I'm 14, turning 15, and I am currently at grade 9.
Thank you, Nat. Thank you for coming. Okay.
Hello, my name is Okay. Yeah, don't be confused. Yeah, my name is Okay. I'm 15. I'm grade 9. I'm in the same school of Nat and Journey, and I'm interested in architecture and designing.
Oh, good. Thank you. Welcome. Thanks for being here. Zara.
Hi, I'm Zara. I'm 16 and I'm also in grade 10 at the British School in Jakarta with Caitlin and Kenneth. And I'm very excited to talk to you all in the breakout rooms.
Great. And Shonak.
Hi, my name is Shonak. I've recently turned 15. I'm currently living in Mumbai and I just moved from Indonesia.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. So Mette, should we go into the breakout groups or do you want to do something more?
I think going into the breakout groups and we'll try to distribute younglings in the breakout groups. So there is an opportunity for you to connect more directly also. You know, taking just a few minutes first of journaling, gathering our thoughts about what we've learned today, but also for those of you where that's relevant, if you've been attending the whole series of webinars that we've had over the last couple of months, maybe just reflect on also the profound interconnectedness of all these aspects that Diana was sharing in the beginning of equity, child and family well-being, how it relates to education, how it relates to population level data on well-being, and how we can help our young people thrive and flourish to an extent that is not seen in the world today. And we all, I think, know inherently that we do need to do something. And here is an opportunity to actually engage with young people in the conversation about what needs to be done. So if we could take just a couple of minutes journaling, and then we'll put you into small group breakouts and you can have a conversation in the groups.
Thank you. Thank you again for being here. To be continued.
Yeah. 2-3 minutes journaling on whatever is coming up for you. Some of the reflections they might be having, you know, listening to our young people.
All right, here we go. So now's our chance to talk about what came up in the breakout groups, what insights you had, what questions you have, anything that you'd like to share with the larger group. We'd love to hear from you. We'll watch for, Megan will help me watch for hands raised, either little yellow mechanical hands or real live hands, whichever works for you. So just something from your breakout group, something, an insight you personally had or an insight that the group had. Here's something. That's just somebody saying thank you.
Diana, I can share in
Is that
it's Jenny.
I thought it was Jenny. I heard, recognized your voice. I couldn't.
Hi. Yeah.
Hi, Jenny. Thank you so much. Yeah.
It just really in our group very much appreciated you know, just the young leaders acknowledgement of the very real emotional emotions that we bring and that this work brings up. And so sort of standing in and acknowledging that alongside the commitment to action. Yes. And that those things are not opposites or it's one or the other, but how do we stand in both? Yes. And really bring that inner strength forward. I just was a very useful insight. We were just all commenting on how inspiring and impressive that was, that, you know, these young people are holding that. So.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, they really got it. And Gus had this image, a very helpful image. I've heard it before. Yeah. This dynamic tension, is that right?
Yeah.
That between, it's sort of there's a writer who talks about a tragic gap. There's a sort of a gap in between, and if you can hold the tension, you can see where you need to go in a different way. So thank you for that, Jenny.
Yeah, you bet.
Anybody else want to jump in?
I think Natalie Math has her hand up.
Oh, good. Natalie.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you. I'm not part of this work, but I'm doing something very similar and trying to empower youth to be resilient and future change makers and leaders.
Where are you doing that work, Natalie?
Well, I'm doing I am in San Francisco in California.
Uh-huh.
So in fact, if you have any connections there, I would be happy to connect with people. What I wanted to say is that it's very inspiring because they are embodying, in their way of being and their way of talking about it, the powerfulness of this work. And what I'm struggling with is trying to convince, I'm trying to work with youth organization and especially youth media organizations in the Bay Area of the importance of developing those inner skills and, relational skills and system thinking approach. And it's me talking to other adults, and I don't know any, local youth who has been through this program. So, what became obvious to me is like, oh my gosh, if just one of those ambassadors could talk to those people, they would get it, rather than me trying to explain why it's important. So, it made me realize like, yeah, it's like embodying, just the result is powerful. And my next question is, how do you plan to scale this work so that, we can have ambassadors and programs in every school? That's like a huge question.
Yeah. So there are a couple of other comments I want to get, but we should come back to, and I'm marking this for somebody to bring us back to it, maybe Gus, maybe Mette, a program called RISE. There's a very large program, in fact, in the Bay Area. It's the Schmidt, Wendy and Eric Schmidt Family Foundation. They put $1 billion into this program to create pathways for young leaders, exceptional young leaders. And we have a connection now with that. That is one way to scale things. But Kurt Newton has his hand up. Kurt, hi, thank you.
Hi, Diane, thanks. Yeah, this is just starting to kind of percolate up for me at the end of our breakout, but it feels like there's something profoundly a little different and important about this work at this intersection of the compassionate systems, tools, and climate change that invites people in, doesn't sort of hit them over the head with a set of policies or directions or things like that, but invites people in with their full thinking and their full selves to participate. And I'm curious what people might have observed about, these approaches, bringing people in to this work in a way that, other methodologies maybe haven't.
Right. That's a great question for all of us to think about. Anybody else wants to? I think one of the things that Gus mentioned, he sort of mentioned it in passing, but no judgment, right? That it's a safe space. Something, the idea of a safe space, some people make fun of it. Some of the hard-headed people say, oh yeah, right, nobody will talk about taking risks, and then you make it safe. It's not taking a risk, but it's a safe space where people can bring themselves fully, and they can bring their questions and their uncertainties and share them with others. And then in that space, they get metabolized in some way. I think it's very different from the hierarchical systems that we've all been systemized to. And
Diana, can I add something to this?
Yes, where are you? Yes.
I don't know where I am, but I'm right here.
Jump right in. Somebody should, yeah, good.
So I think, just wanted to tie one comment to that, and then the scaling thing we can get back to if there's time. But we have had one participant in our last cohort that we just ended 1 week ago, and she was really interested in the pacing of the program. So we have 90-minute sessions, right? And we would spend about half an hour to 45 minutes getting in the room together, doing a meditation or a grounding exercise, some inner exercise for about 10 minutes, doing journaling,
that's interesting.
Doing check-ins in small groups,
yes.
And then checking in collectively. That's half the time spent just doing that. And I think, to your point, Kurt,
yes.
if we were to go straight to the point, I think you can put it in perspective by saying, if we were dealing with acknowledged like traumatic or therapeutic stuff with people, we would always take the time to allow for them to become comfortable and safe. But we're not acknowledging that something like climate change is actually just this kind of thing, where if you just lay it out on people in like 30 minutes, and then now it's on to the next subject, that's actually, in my opinion, I don't want to put any strong words, but I would say that's some kind of abuse. Right. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. That's a great point. Thank you very much. Anybody else have a hand up? I'm having trouble scanning the room. Megan, does anybody else?
I don't see anyone else.
Okay. So Gus,
I just say, I put my hand up, but I just wanted to respond to what Gus just said, because that time pressure is so
Karen Alvarez. Yeah, thank you.
So much a part of what we're dealing with. Like, I run a lot of meetings, or I work with mostly adults, and people become very frustrated if you don't get to the point, right? And that, I think that it can be abusive just to jump in, and then we end up making up solutions that don't actually fix the issue that we're there to discuss. So I really appreciate what you said, Gus, that it's not an add-on, it is the process. Checking in with yourself is the work. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it.
Great point. I think that's one of the things from the Master's Practitioners program, that people, that check-in, which seems so simple, the idea of it, good deal. We check in with each other. We ask how we're doing. We're allowed to bring in our lives into this space where we're now going to do work together. But that's one of the most profound changes. And once it gets built into the culture, people don't want it to go away. They understand that it's absolutely essential, and it's one of the tools that's really most transformative in a way, I think. Other comments? So does somebody want to say something about the connection to RISE? Because I thought that was pretty interesting. To the Mette? Yeah, Gus?
I'll say,
yeah.
Unless anybody else wants to, I'll say just, a few words about scaling. So basically what we've been doing now is to run this program twice. And it's been, a little bigger each time, but now we feel like we've perfected it a lot more than in the beginning, and also quite a lot more from the first to the second time.
I'll interrupt for a minute. You even did a little study, a pilot study, to see how it was doing and learn from that. So you've been taking that seriously too.
Definitely gathered some data as well, and trying to take that part of the process seriously. And we are now doing one program over the summer with this RISE initiative. We'll have 75 young people from all across the globe who will also be joining this group that we have of global ambassadors. And then, of course, we also want to, really partner with the En-ROADS Ambassador Program that is already a full-fledged big part of like the climate interactive approach. And they have many hundreds ambassadors. And, so they are also sort of some prospects for us to work with that. And then as we do more programs, hopefully in the long run, if we have this like-minded community of global compassionate systems climate leaders, if you were to do some activism or something in your locality, maybe you could mobilize so that could happen many other places and so on. So we really try to create a community, but we also acknowledge that it's going to take a while.
But you're being very strategic about it. Admirably so, I think. And wouldn't it be fun if something at MIT could emerge with young people? I'm not sure exactly what it would look like, but maybe we're planting that seed too.
I think there's a key that we've heard again and again, and different of you spoke about it very eloquently, that if we can really create spaces to invite people to bring their whole self. You know, as you were saying, Kenneth, I was looking for you right there. We tend to think we're rational and have emotions, but we're first emotional and have the capacity to reason. And if we can kind of have that orientation, that this is a process that can, in some sense, only be led by people bringing all of themselves, then there's a different kind of invitation. I think you are absolutely right, Kurt. You know, it is about, you know, how do we create the sort of invitation? I mean, global isn't just mean it's all around the world. It just means also it's everywhere. This is all of our problem. So we have to invite all of ourselves.
If I may.
Yes. So can you say your name? Because I'm having trouble.
Yes. My name's Isamu. I'm from
Yes.
California, USA.
Okay. Thank you. Good.
And branching off of what you said, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and one of the arguments I've heard to push back against bring your whole selves to work is, for the large part, like in corporate America, I've heard people say that is not something that will happen. And one of the arguments they make is, like, if you look at capitalist society, it is not really the people that they're concerned about, but the profits, shareholder value. And when investors are looking at companies, they're not going to look at like, are people bringing their whole selves to work? They're looking at bottom line. They're looking at the equity and stuff like that. And I'm wondering, is being in a capitalist society a limiting factor, or is it possible to integrate that in a capitalist society? And that is where I'm wondering, is it possible?
I really hear you here, Isamu. And one of the balances in this whole endeavor of creating, you know, more compassionate systems change approaches in many different places in the world is exactly not trying to play into the corporate strategy, which is, you know, the mindfulness strategy, in the sense of you feed people these tools and practices so that they are able to work even more. It's not about well-being or stress reduction. It's about being able to calm yourself down enough so that even when you're stressed, you can still, you know, accomplish what's needed. And that has been a quite, I think, saddening tendency in all of this. And one of the ways in which we try to formulate it is, this is not about striving for outer goals of better achievements or greater accomplishments, or always, you know, constantly making yourself better or more right, or all of that. On the contrary, it's about connecting to the deep source of this unique, once in a lifetime, once in the history of life experience of you being here right in this moment, and focusing on, what does that mean? What is the stuff that I can contribute with in my lifetime here right now? And it's different in the sense that it doesn't, we're not after trying to play into the corporate strategy. Now, can that exist in capitalism? The fact is that it does. And yes, there are challenges and constraints that come with that. But as we always, so our whole approach to systems change is based on living systems. And all new things arise in nature in the presence of everything that's there already. So the idea of just taking a big broom and wiping out all the structures that we have would just produce chaos and probably not generate the types of outcomes that we would like to see. But here in return, we're trying to really work with the structures of the systems and societies we're in, but humanizing them or rehumanizing them to some extent. So I think it's a great question. And it's a very subtle shift in orientation, but it's a very, very important one. So thank you for bringing that into the space.
Our colleague Otto Scharmer, a dear friend of Peter's, likes to talk about, he has a picture of an iceberg with, I think, 13 acupuncture points, he calls them, 13 systems that are crumbling and falling apart. And underneath that, he says, underneath that, there are three kinds of alienation. It's very much what Gus was saying. Alienation of self from self, alienation of self from other, and alienation of self from nature. And if we can heal those three gaps, we can start a revolution. But thank you, Ishma. That's a very pertinent question you've asked. Many people are asking it. Anything else?
I have a question for any of the young people who are here who would, I mean, it's not a simple one, but any thoughts you have. It's back to one of the themes that came out right at the beginning. If we're really honest, the system of education is a system created by adults and done to kids. That's it, period. And you could say the same thing about society as a whole. You don't get invited very often to bring your voice as leaders. You know that well, yet you've created spaces to do that. I'm just curious, what do you think the adult world needs to learn that'll wake us up to the possibilities that, we are amidst a lot of people who have exactly the kind of energy needed and the time horizon needed, which obviously is more than 50 years. What do we need to learn that we're not learning?
I think maybe one of the main things is just that it has to be the opportunity set up for both parties to engage together and connect. So we get this kind of importance and people can see it for themselves. And I think based on that, people can evaluate themselves, how they feel the importance of youth leadership, and they can, they can see it themselves, and we get to connect. So I think one of the main things that is important is just the opportunity and having this opportunity and experience set up so that people can experience it themselves.
So Caitlin, in the program that you've been part of, the BJS program, BSJ, I guess, you have, as Gus said, you have faculty and other adults in the system in circles in conversations with students. What's that like? And do you see the elders moving, hearing something different, hearing answers to Peter's question in a way, being moved by you? Yeah, go ahead.
I think we're working with the leadership teams in our school increasingly now. And now they kind of treat us as more on the same level instead of, that teacher and student regular structure and that lecture kind of structure. So I think we're starting to get in that role where we're openly sharing ideas, and that really helps open up communication and also a greater communication of ideas that will possibly help the school improve certain programs that we feel needs improvement, or just providing feedback that will overall improve the education experience and enhance it for all the students alike.
Thank you. So is it our notions of success that are distorted? Is that what needs to be redefined?
I wouldn't say distorted. However, I think it could be improved in the sense that maybe include more student opinions, because obviously we're going to be the leaders of the future, and in the school environment, it's the students that are going to be developing in it. So you need to help the school, help the students to provide a great environment for them to nurture themselves and gain the knowledge that they need in order to not only learn the essential subjects, but also use the information that they have to take action on wider things that we know of.
And to think about what a good life would look like, right, for the long haul.
I just wanted to add to something Caitlin said. I think that one really important thing that we need to remember as we get older is that not to take ourselves too seriously, because when we're younger, there's a lot more space to make mistakes and to grow because it's learning experience. And I know that as you get older and you reach certain ages, it's like milestones where you're expected to be someone and do something. You're supposed to have this life planned out at a certain age, and there's expectations. And so I think that sometimes people take themselves a bit too seriously, and it's like if they aren't at the same level as their surrounding fellow colleagues or people, then they think that it's like, oh my God, I'm not doing this correctly. But if we just leave space for us to develop and make mistakes, that I think that it'll be a more welcoming environment to a lot more people, and that we'll be able to create safer spaces where we'll be able to share emotions and talk. Like, for example, when I first started this program at BSJ with these lovely people, Caitlin and Kenneth, and when Gus was teaching us, we found it really hard to share our emotions and be able to connect with one another. But after creating this space where we were okay to make mistakes, we found it was really easy to actually like think about what the other person was kind of thinking and be able to actually connect and build on each other's ideas and passions for the future. Once we actually broke that barrier of it's okay that we make mistakes sometimes.
That's
So I think
lovely.
that
That's lovely. Lighten up. I saw a poster somewhere recently. It said, we don't stop playing because we get old. We get old because we stop playing. I think you're right. If we could lighten up and just take the sort of perfectionism, the pressure to succeed in a certain way, just lighten that up, lift it. It's a great point. Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Yeah, jump in. Yes.
Here.
Ishamu, yeah.
There's a song lyric I'm fond of, which is why does it take catastrophe to start a revolution? And I think that really speaks to what I think is kind of like a human tendency, and maybe it's something that's perhaps beyond our control, but I think that is reflected in today's society. And I would say I'm a bit more optimistic than some of my friends about this, but I'm wondering if youth can model the behavior and the change we want to see in the world. I'm wondering if like we've kind of talked about it, generalizing all adults as one, which is not really the case. I know there are vastly different ideologies between adults, and I think while we do view older generations as maybe more reluctant or hesitant to kind of buy into the like being emotionally in touch with ourselves, I think there are some adults who can hear it, and I'm wondering if youth can model the behavior and change we want to see in the world. Can that sort of bleed into or kind of inspire those few adults who can then inspire the rest of them? And I'm wondering, like, can we get a cascade of positive, change in that way? And I'm hopeful that that can happen, but that is something I just don't know.
Well, that's beautiful. That's our benediction. We can all take that hope forward with us from this session. Thank you so much for providing it for us. And we're running out of time. I think it looks like we have to begin closing down. Peter?
Mette, would you like to kind of lead us through a closing?
Just to thank everyone. I know that we're just at our closing time. This whole webinar series has been gradually introducing this concept of systems awareness and how we are attempting to begin to study systems awareness, but from a systems awareness perspective. So we will hopefully not fall into the pitfall of reductionism when we try to tease out what, for example, constitutes a generative social field in which young people and everyone in it can thrive and feel nourished and flourish. And so those are some of the things that we are aspiring to begin to study now that we've built this huge body of work with a lot of adults and all this these wonderful young people as well. So stay tuned on whichever channel you got information about this call. We'll certainly keep you updated on next events as well.
Great.
So wonderful to see you today. Thank you.
Right, and a great word of thanks to Gus and Jonas and to all of the young people, the younglings, as Mette likes to call them. For some of us, they're much younger. But thank you so much for being here. Really inspiring to be
and all
with
of you in Indonesia and Thailand. You should really go to bed.
Go to bed, yeah.
Go to bed.
Sleep. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Be well, everyone. Take care.